The ivory gavel struck the mahogany pedestal for the third time, sealing the fate of €2 million in a single transaction. Andrew Costa raised his Dom Pérignon champagne flute as the entire Monte Carlo casino ballroom erupted in polite applause, the kind typical of the European elite who never show excessive enthusiasm. Beside him, Camilla slid her perfectly manicured fingers over the arm of his Brioni suit, her brown eyes gleaming with the same intensity as the emeralds in the Cartier necklace she had just acquired. "You are absolutely generous," she murmured into his ear, leaving a trail of Chanel No. 5 perfume that cost more than the average family's annual salary. Her red lips curved into a smile that promised rewards far beyond that charity evening. Andrew felt his chest swell with satisfaction. At 43, he had built a real estate empire that stretched from Miami to Dubai, transforming abandoned lots into gleaming skyscrapers. His name graced business magazines, and his presence at events like this validated his position among the truly powerful. Camilla, 28, an Argentinian model who had conquered runways from Paris to Milan, represented everything a man in his position deserved: stunning beauty, international sophistication, and an insatiable hunger for luxury that he loved to indulge. "For you, anything," he replied, kissing her temple, aware of the envious glances they were receiving from the other guests. The auctioneer, a silver-haired Frenchman in an impeccable tuxedo, returned to the microphone after discreetly consulting his assistant. Something in his expression had changed. His professional ease had been replaced by an almost imperceptible tension, visible only in the slightly contracted corners of his lips. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice echoed through the sound system, "we now have an extraordinary item that has just been added to our program tonight." Andrew barely paid attention. He was mentally calculating whether he should also bid on the Banksy painting scheduled 3 lots from now. Camilla had mentioned several times her fascination with contemporary urban art, and impressing her was worth any investment. Besides, Banksy consistently appreciated in value, making the purchase both a gift and a smart financial investment. "This next lot," the auctioneer continued, his voice taking on a peculiar tone that began to draw the audience's attention, "is truly unique in the history of our charity auctions." The ballroom lights dimmed slightly, focusing on the stage where a woman emerged from the side curtains. Andrew felt every muscle in his body instantly freeze. The champagne almost slipped from his fingers. Renata walked across the stage with the natural elegance she had always possessed, the kind that didn't come from runways or training, but from decades of genuinely belonging to that world. Her blood-red Valentino dress hugged curves that motherhood and 41 years had made even more magnificent. Her brown hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, and even from a distance, Andrew recognized the pearl necklace he had given her on their 10th wedding anniversary, 5 years ago, an eternity in another life. The ballroom plunged into absolute silence. 200 people collectively held their breath. "My dear friends," Renata's voice floated through the room, controlled and melodious, "I am immensely grateful for the opportunity to contribute to this noble cause tonight. After all, charities depend on the generosity of the most fortunate." She paused, an elegant smile curving her lips as her eyes swept the audience until they found exactly whom they were looking for. Andrew felt the impact of that gaze like a punch to the gut. Beside him, Camilla stiffened, finally understanding the connection. "I would like to auction something extremely valuable," Renata continued, accepting the wireless microphone the auctioneer offered her with trembling hands. "A package I would call premium divorce. It includes the mansion in Beverly Hills, 450 Rodeo Drive, 12,000 square feet, 8 suites, an infinity pool with ocean views, recently appraised at $18 million. Murmurs began to ripple through the audience. Cameras of photographers accredited to cover the event awoke like predators smelling blood in the water. Flashes began to pop. Also included, Renata continued impassively, a custom Ferrari SF90 Stradale, midnight blue with hand-stitched Italian leather interiors. Only 600 kilometers on the odometer. My husband rarely finds time to drive it. He's always so busy with his engagements." The subtle emphasis on the word engagements did not go unnoticed. Nervous laughter echoed through the room. Andrew tried to stand, but his legs refused to obey. Camilla pulled away from him as if he were burning, creating physical space between them, as all eyes converged on their table. A 50-foot Sunseeker yacht docked in Marina del Rey. Renata listed with the naturalness of someone rattling off grocery items. Fully equipped, crew not included, although I can recommend excellent professionals who don't ask inconvenient questions about frequent female passengers. The ballroom was now reacting openly. Some women laughed, others whispered furiously. The men were divided between empathetic embarrassment and voyeuristic delight at someone else's disaster. And finally, Renata's voice gained a layer of polished steel. 52% of the shares of Costa Development Corporation, a company valued at $400 million last quarter. Absolute majority control. Whoever bids on this package not only gains magnificent properties, but also the power of decision over every venture, every contract, every business move. The French auctioneer had given up any attempt to control the situation. He stood paralyzed beside the pedestal, an impotent witness to a spectacle that completely transcended the protocol of Monaco's charity auctions. "Starting bid," Renata announced, her eyes fixed on Andrew with laser intensity. "1 symbolic euro. After all, some things we consider valuable turn out to be surprisingly cheap." The first hand went up before she even finished the sentence. A Saudi sheikh known for collecting American properties as souvenirs. 50,000 euros, his deep voice resonated. 100,000, countered a Russian oil heiress, wicked amusement plastered across her face. 500,000, offered a Chinese tech magnate. The bids skyrocketed. 1 million, 2 million, 3.5 million. It wasn't just the assets being auctioned. Andrew understood through the fog of shock clouding his reason. It was public humiliation turned into entertainment for bored billionaires. It was revenge served on a silver platter with a side of French champagne. Renata remained on stage, motionless as a Greek statue, observing the chaos she had orchestrated with surgical precision. Every camera flash captured her serene expression. Every click documented the public downfall of Andrew Costa, the untouchable businessman who had believed he could have everything without consequences. Camilla stood up abruptly, almost knocking over her chair. Without a word, without a glance, she walked across the ballroom toward the exit, her Louboutin heels clicking like accusations against the marble. Other guests moved away from Andrew's table, as if he carried a contagious disease. In minutes, he was completely alone, surrounded by empty chairs, while the auction of his life reached 16 million euros. On stage, Renata finally allowed her smile to widen genuinely, a predator savoring complete victory. The ivory gavel never fell. It remained suspended in the air as the last bid echoed through the ballroom, transformed into a modern gladiatorial arena. 22 million euros. The winner, a German pharmaceutical magnate Andrew vaguely recognized from some conference in Berlin, raised his glass toward the stage in a silent toast. Renata inclined her head in a gesture of gratitude so graceful it seemed rehearsed, though Andrew knew none of it was improvised. She had planned every second. When he finally managed to force his legs to work, Andrew pushed his chair back so hard it toppled over, the sound muffled by the growing buzz of the crowd. He needed to get out of there. He needed to breathe. He needed to find Renata and undo this madness before it became irreversible. His Italian Oxford shoes, which cost $3,000 and were custom-made in Florence, stumbled on the Persian carpet as he moved between the tables. Familiar faces turned to watch him, some with poorly disguised pity, others with that peculiar gleam people display when witnessing others' tragedies. "Andrew, my dear," a French voice tried to stop him. Marcel Dubois, an investor with whom he had closed a lucrative deal in Nice the previous year. "This is all just theater, isn't it? A joke between you two?" He didn't even respond. He pushed open the double doors leading to the casino's main corridor, leaving behind the ballroom where his reputation had just been publicly cremated. The corridor stretched out in white and gold marble, decorated with crystal chandeliers that reflected his distorted image from multiple angles. Each reflection showed a different man from the one who had walked through those same doors 3 hours earlier. "Looking for someone?" Renata's voice cut through the silence like a scalpel blade. She was leaning against a marble column near the private elevators, a martini glass in hand, the relaxed posture of someone who had just won a war. Under the soft corridor lighting, Andrew noticed details that the distance from the stage had hidden: the flawless makeup that accentuated her green eyes, the red lipstick applied with pinpoint precision, the diamond earrings he had never seen before, and that definitely didn't come from his jewelry collection. "What did you do?" The words came out weaker than Andrew intended, almost a plea. "Philanthropy," Renata replied, raising the martini to her lips. 22 million euros for underprivileged children in Africa. You should be proud. You've never been so generous." "Renata, this is insanity. You can't just auction off my assets. There are laws, contracts, legal protections." "Our assets," she corrected, each syllable carefully articulated. "Community property regime, remember? We signed those tedious documents 15 years ago in the presence of Attorney Whitmore, his office in Manhattan, 10th floor with a view of Central Park. You wore a navy blue tie. I wore a cream dress. We were so in love." The sarcasm in the last sentence weighed like lead. Andrew approached, trying to find some trace of the woman he had known, had loved. "We can fix this. Talk." "Camilla means nothing." Renata's laughter echoed through the empty corridor, crystalline and cruel. "Camilla? You think this is about Camilla?" She pushed off the column, approaching him with measured steps. "Darling, Camilla is just the latest. The model before her was named Tatiana. Russian, blue eyes, you met in Dubai during that real estate investment conference. Before her, Luciana, the Brazilian journalist who interviewed you for Forbes. Before her, Sophie, the French woman who worked at the hotel in Paris." Each name was a stab. Andrew felt the blood drain from his face. "How did you know?" Renata finished the sentence for him. "Because I'm not stupid, Andrew. Because 3 years ago, I hired the best private investigators in London. Because I have photographs, hotel records, credit card receipts, recovered text messages. Because while you underestimated me, I built a case so solid that your own lawyers would recommend a settlement." She stopped inches from him, so close Andrew could smell the different perfume she was wearing. It was no longer the Chanel he bought for her. It was something new, chosen by her, for herself. "Did you really think you could do this indefinitely? That I would stay in Beverly Hills organizing charity dinners and pretending not to notice the whispered phone calls, the business trips that extended into weekends, the smell of expensive French perfume on your shirts?" "Why now?" Andrew heard himself ask, his voice hoarse. "Why this way?" Renata stepped back, returning to her position by the column, reassembling her armor of elegant indifference. "Because 3 weeks ago, our daughter asked me if Daddy didn't like us anymore. Isabella, 8 years old, with eyes just like yours, asked if it was her fault you were never home. And in that moment, realizing my daughter was internalizing your betrayals as personal rejection, I decided enough was enough." The mention of Isabella pierced Andrew like a bullet. His daughter, the little girl with brown curls who woke up early on Saturdays to have breakfast with him, who drew cards for every occasion, who waited up for him despite being sleepy when he promised to come home early. How many promises had he broken? How many recitals had he missed? How many nights had he left his daughter waiting while he dined with women whose last names he barely remembered? "I never meant to hurt her," he whispered. "But you did hurt. You hurt me. You hurt her. You hurt the family we built." Renata finished her martini and placed the glass on a small mahogany side table. "And today, in front of all the European elite, of photographers who will distribute these images to every gossip magazine and financial newspaper in the world, I return the favor. So this is revenge. This is consequence. Renata pressed the elevator button. Revenge would be to destroy you completely. Consequence is allowing you to experience a fraction of the public humiliation you silently inflicted on me for years. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Renata stepped inside, turning to face him one last time that night. In the elevator's golden light, she looked different, stronger, more whole. As if she had recovered pieces of herself that Andrew hadn't even realized he was stealing. "Oh, and for your information," she added as the doors began to close, "the auction was completely legal. I consulted 7 different lawyers in 3 countries. The documents have already been electronically signed by the bidder. The money will be transferred tomorrow to the charity, and our divorce will be finalized in 30 days. You'll receive the papers in your suite." "My suite?" Andrew repeated, confused. "Sorry, the hotel suite. I cancelled our penthouse reservation and paid for a standard room for you at the Holiday Inn on the coastal road. I thought it was appropriate. Your luggage has already been moved." The doors closed completely, swallowing Renata's image and leaving Andrew alone in the empty corridor. From the auction hall, sounds of animated conversations, laughter, and the clinking of glasses still carried. The party continued, now with a new topic of discussion that would fuel conversations for months. He slowly sank until he was sitting on the cold marble floor, a sloppy posture unthinkable for someone of his position. But what position was left? In a few hours, he had lost his mistress, his reputation, his assets, and most painfully, the respect of the only woman who had truly known him. His cell phone vibrated in his tuxedo pocket, a message from his executive assistant. "Mr. Costa, I'm getting calls from 17 different journalists. How should I proceed?" Andrew turned off his phone without replying. For the first time in a 20-year career building real estate empires, closing multi-million-dollar deals, conquering everything he desired, he absolutely did not know how to proceed. The corridor remained silent around him, an apathetic witness to his collapse. Outside, Monaco glittered with golden lights reflected in the Mediterranean, indifferent to the small human tragedies unfolding within its luxurious casinos. And somewhere in that gleaming city, Renata was probably toasting her newfound freedom, while he remained alone on the cold floor, finally understanding the true price of his choices. The Holiday Inn on the coastal road smelled of industrial detergent and frustrated ambition. Andrew remained sitting on the edge of the standard-sized double bed, observing the Louis Vuitton suitcases that looked ridiculously out of place in that environment of worn beige carpet and faded floral curtains. Through the narrow window, he could only glimpse the parking lot lit by yellowish sodium lamps, where a scratched Renault shared space with a minivan covered in family stickers. 4 hours had passed since the auction. 4 hours during which his phone hadn't stopped vibrating with messages, missed calls, social media notifications, where his name had already become a trending topic. 17 journalists, his assistant had said. Now it was 43, according to the last count before Andrew completely turned off the device. He should have been planning countermeasures, contacting lawyers, drafting damage control strategies, preparing public statements. This was how he had always operated. Problems arose, solutions were implemented, results were achieved. Simple, efficient, profitable. But sitting there in that cheap room, wearing an €8,000 tuxedo that now seemed like a ridiculous costume, Andrew found he could think of absolutely nothing but Isabella's face when he had left for Monaco 4 days earlier. She held a drawing she had made at school, something with yellow flowers and a family holding hands. "For when you come back, Daddy," she had said in that small, hopeful voice that always melted any resistance. He had promised they would go back to the amusement park together the following Saturday. He had promised they would watch that princess movie she had been mentioning for weeks. He had promised to be at her school piano recital next Friday. How many promises had he made over the years? How many had he broken without a second thought? The memory of Renata mentioning Isabella in that corridor came back with renewed force. his daughter internalizing the betrayals as personal rejection, an 8-year-old child processing paternal absence as her own fault, as if she wasn't interesting enough to keep his attention. Andrew stood up abruptly, unable to stay still. The room was tiny compared to the penthouse he had originally booked, that presidential suite with a private terrace and panoramic views of the Mediterranean where he planned to spend the night with Camilla. Now it was perhaps 12 paces from wall to wall, with a bathroom with a stained acrylic shower and a 20-inch flat-screen TV nailed to the wall. He turned on the TV more out of a need for noise than out of real interest. The remote control responded slowly, cycling through local French channels until it found an international news station. It took less than 5 minutes for his own image to fill the screen. The footage was brutally clear, every angle captured by professional photographers with state-of-the-art equipment. Renata on stage, stunning under the spotlights, announcing the auction with that aristocratic composure that had always been naturally hers. The room reacted with progressive shock. And he, Andrew Costa, a $400 million real estate magnate, visibly shrinking in his chair as his life was dismantled piece by piece before 200 witnesses. The news anchor, a middle-aged British woman with a severe haircut, narrated with barely contained enthusiasm. What's being called the most dramatic auction in Monaco's history has gone viral in the last few hours. Renata Almeida Costa, until yesterday known primarily as the wife of American-Brazilian businessman Andrew Costa, transformed a charity event into a public reckoning that has already generated over 50 million views on social media. The screen split, showing clips being shared on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Users were creating memes. Renata was being declared Queen of Revenge, feminist icon, my hero. Andrew appeared in ridiculous montages, transformed into an international joke. Legal experts we consulted confirmed the auction was completely legal, the anchor continued. Ms. Costa consulted legal experts in multiple jurisdictions and exploited loopholes in the couple's matrimonial property regime. The bidder, identified as Klaus Hoffmann, a German pharmaceutical magnate, declared he considered the package an excellent investment and had no intention of renegotiating. Andrew turned off the television. The sudden silence of the room weighed more than any public condemnation. He walked to the window, resting his forehead against the cold glass. Downstairs, a family was leaving one of the rooms, the father carrying a small sleeping child, while the mother dragged modest suitcases. They were laughing about something, walking together towards their rental car, united in a way Andrew suddenly recognized as infinitely more valuable than any financial asset. When he had met Renata, she worked as an assistant curator at an art gallery in São Paulo. Andrew had just closed his first major deal, a residential complex in Miami that had multiplied his initial investment 5-fold. He was in Brazil exploring expansion opportunities, visiting the gallery more out of social obligation than genuine interest in contemporary art. Renata wore a simple blue cotton dress and spoke about a light installation with a passion that made her eyes sparkle. She didn't know who he was. She wasn't impressed when he casually mentioned his company. Instead, she challenged his opinions on urban architecture, arguing that real estate developers often prioritized profit over community impact. He was fascinated, not by her beauty, although she was unquestionably beautiful, but by her substance, by her sharp intelligence, by the way she didn't need him, didn't want anything from him, was perfectly complete being exactly who she was. It took 6 months of persistent courtship before she agreed to have dinner with him, another 3 months until she admitted she loved him. On the day they got married, in an intimate ceremony in Cartagena with only 20 guests, Andrew swore he would never do anything to extinguish that sparkle in her eyes. When had he broken that promise? It wasn't a conscious decision, he realized now. It was gradual erosion. The first business trip that stretched beyond what was necessary. The first client dinner that included an innocent flirtation with an attractive stranger. The first time he chose to close a deal instead of coming home for Isabella's birthday. Small betrayals that accumulated like sediment, slowly burying the man who had promised to be faithful. Tatiana appeared in his life during a conference in Dubai, a Russian model who worked for a partner company, all long legs and exotic accent. They had dinner discussing marketing strategies. They ended up in her suite at the Burj Al Arab. Andrew flew home 2 days later and kissed Renata in the kitchen, knowing exactly what he had done, feeling absolutely no guilt that lasted beyond the return flight. Luciana came after, Sophie after her, others whose names already blurred in his memory, interchangeable faces of women who validated his ego, who made him feel powerful and desirable, who demanded nothing beyond expensive gifts and temporary attention. And Camilla, the most recent, the one he had truly thought was different, special enough to justify the increasing risks he was taking. But they weren't different. None of them were. They were symptoms, not causes. External manifestations of an internal emptiness Andrew had spent a decade and a half trying to fill with achievements that never fully satisfied. His phone, still turned off on the nightstand, seemed to weigh tons. Andrew knew that when he finally turned it back on, he would find messages from his partners demanding explanations about the impact on the company's stock. From investors reconsidering partnerships. From Klaus Hoffmann presenting terms for the transition of controlling interest. But for now, in the solitude of that cheap room in Monaco, all he could think about was Isabella drawing yellow flowers, waiting for a father who never arrived. About Renata organizing charity dinners and smiling at acquaintances while slowly dying inside, bearing the weight of maintaining the facade of a perfect family all by herself. He had built an empire. He had transformed land into skyscrapers, investments into fortunes, opportunities into exponential profits. And in the process, he had systematically destroyed the only thing that truly mattered. The irony was not lost on him. He had spent €2 million on a necklace to impress a mistress who had disappeared at the first sign of trouble. Meanwhile, Renata had meticulously planned for years, building an irrefutable case, preparing her exit with the same surgical precision he applied to business. She had always been smarter than him, stronger, more complete as a human being, and he had been too arrogant to realize. Andrew sank back onto the bed, his eyes fixed on the water-stained ceiling. Through the thin walls, he heard muffled conversations in French, a baby crying, someone watching television at high volume, sounds of normal lives happening all around, indifferent to the particular tragedy of a man who had had everything and thrown it away for reasons that now seemed pathetically and shamefully insignificant. Tomorrow, he would need to face the practical consequences. Lawyers, contracts, negotiations, an attempt to save what remained of his company and reputation. But tonight, alone in that room that smelled of anonymous failures, Andrew Costa finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he had lost. And for the first time in 15 years of marriage, he cried. Dawn filtered through the cheap glass of the Holiday Inn window, bringing with it a gray light that seemed to judge every object in the room with clinical indifference. Andrew woke up still wearing his crumpled tuxedo, his body stiff from the uncomfortable position on the narrow bed. For a blessed moment of semi-consciousness, he remembered nothing. Then reality crashed down on him with the force of an imploding building, and every fragment of the previous night's disaster reassembled in his mind with brutal clarity. His phone remained off on the nightstand, but Andrew knew he couldn't avoid it forever. With fingers that trembled more than he'd like to admit, he pressed the power button and watched the screen come to life. The explosion of notifications was immediate and overwhelming. 263 unread messages, 97 missed calls. His news apps displayed red alerts like open wounds. The first message was from Richard Pemberton, his senior partner at Costa Development. Just 3 words: call, immediately, urgent. The second was from his mother in Boca Raton, written with that characteristic excessive punctuation. Andrew, what's going on? I saw the news. Call me. Andrew scrolled through the messages without reading most of them, looking for a specific name that wasn't anywhere. Nothing from Renata, no direct communication from her. Just a message from a law firm in Geneva. confirming that divorce papers would be delivered via courier within the next 48 hours. He dragged himself to the tiny bathroom. The mirror above the cracked sink reflected a stranger with red eyes and a 5 o'clock shadow, disheveled hair that he usually kept perfectly combed. The €8,000 tuxedo looked like a thrift store rag after a whole night crumpled. Andrew undressed mechanically, abandoning the expensive pieces in a careless pile on the cold ceramic floor. The shower spat out lukewarm water with irregular pressure, so far removed from the spa showers of the penthouse he had originally reserved that it would almost make him laugh if it weren't so pathetic. But as the water hit his tense shoulders, Andrew discovered there was something strangely liberating in that forced simplicity. No one knew where he was. No one could find him immediately. For a few hours, he existed in a limbo between the man he had been and the consequences he would inevitably have to face. He dressed in tailored pants and a shirt his team had packed, casual clothes that still cost more than most people's monthly salaries. But without his usual polish, without the armor of power he had carefully built over the years, Andrew felt unprotected and vulnerable. Finally, taking a deep breath like a diver about to submerge, he dialed Richard's number. His partner's voice exploded through the speaker before the first ring completed. "Where the hell are you? I've tried to reach you 17 times. "I'm in Monaco, in a hotel." "In a hotel." Richard repeated the words with bitter disbelief. "You're in a hotel while our company is collapsing." The stock fell 23% when the market opened this morning. 23%, Andrew. Investors are in a panic. The board of directors is demanding an emergency meeting. And Klaus Hoffmann has already sent legal representatives presenting documentation to assume majority control. Andrew closed his eyes. He knew this would happen, but hearing the confirmation turned possibility into concrete reality. "How much time do we have?" "For what?" Richard's voice was loaded with barely contained frustration. "To save the company? To reverse disastrous public relations? To stop Hoffmann from completely restructuring our operation? Pick your preferred disaster." "The auction was legal, Richard. I consulted lawyers this morning." Renata covered all angles. Silence on the other end. Then, calmer but infinitely more dangerous, Richard asked, "Are you saying there's nothing we can do?" "I'm saying she spent years preparing this, while I was." Andrew cut himself off, unable to finish the sentence. "While you were screwing half the models in Europe," Richard completed brutally. "Yes, Andrew, we all knew."
"We pretended not to know, because you were productive, because you generated profits, because your personal weaknesses seemed irrelevant as long as the numbers kept growing. But now your weaknesses have cost us control of our company to a German who has already made clear his intention to implement radical structural changes." Every word was a deserved lash. Andrew leaned against the room's wall,
slowly sliding down until he was sitting on the rough carpet. "I'm sorry." "Sorry?" Richard laughed without humor. "We have 140 employees depending on this company, families, mortgages, health plans, and you offer an apology? What do you want me to do?" Another pause. When Richard spoke again, his voice carried an exhausted resignation. "Get back to Los Angeles. Face the board. Negotiate with Hoffmann. Try to save what you can. And for God's sake, hire a public relations team before this becomes completely irrecoverable." The call ended abruptly. Andrew remained sitting on the floor, phone still pressed against his ear, listening to the dead silence of the broken connection. Through the thin wall, voices in French discussed plans for the day. A normal family doing normal things, completely oblivious to the fact that just a few feet away an empire was crumbling. He should have been planning strategies, contacting allies, mobilizing resources. But all he could think about was Isabella waking up that morning in Beverly Hills, perhaps asking her mother when Daddy would come back, without understanding that Daddy had just lost the house where she had grown up, that their lives were about to change in ways no 8-year-old child should have to process. His phone vibrated again. A message from an unknown number, with a Brazilian country code. Andrew opened it with hesitant fingers. It was a photograph. Isabella and Renata in the garden of the Beverly Hills mansion, except that upon closer inspection, Andrew realized it wasn't Beverly Hills. The garden was different, smaller, more intimate. There were purple bougainvillea he didn't recognize and, in the background, colonial architecture that definitely didn't exist in California. The accompanying message simply said, "We're fine. Don't look for us." Brazil. Renata had taken Isabella to Brazil. To her family in São Paulo, Andrew presumed. To the support network she had maintained all those years while he built an empire in foreign territory. She had not only planned his public destruction, she had also planned her own reconstruction, establishing a safe base far from his reach. The meticulous intelligence of the operation left him simultaneously terrified and impressed. Renata had orchestrated every move with military precision. The auction timed perfectly for maximum impact, irrefutable legal documentation, a strategic escape to a jurisdiction where he would have difficulty exerting influence. And that photograph sent not to hurt him, but to ensure he knew his daughter was safe and protected, that despite everything, Renata wasn't cruel, just decisive. Andrew zoomed in on the image, studying Isabella's face. She was smiling genuinely, holding what looked like artisanal ice cream, her brown curls loose in the wind. There was no sadness in those eyes, no confusion or pain. Just a child's simple joy, savoring dessert on a sunny afternoon. His daughter was happy, possibly happier than she had been in months, free from the tension that permeated the Beverly Hills house, away from the charged silences between parents who pretended a unity that no longer existed. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Isabella didn't need him. Not the version of him that had existed in recent years, always absent, always prioritizing business and clandestine meetings over piano recitals and yellow flower drawings. Renata was enough. Her family in Brazil would be enough. His daughter would grow up surrounded by love and stability, just without the corrosive presence of a father who promised worlds and delivered disappointment wrapped in expensive gifts. He replied to the message with trembling hands. "Take good care of her." 3 dots appeared, indicating Renata was typing. Then they vanished. No reply came. Andrew didn't expect one. He had said what needed to be said, and her silence spoke volumes about newly established boundaries he wouldn't be allowed to cross. Another message arrived, this time from Patricia Chen, the corporate lawyer he had kept on retainer for 8 years. "Hoffman wants a meeting. He's willing to negotiate, keeping you in a consultative position if you cooperate with the transition. Respond." Consultative position, elegant corporate language for a spectacular demotion. From majority controller to consultant in less than 24 hours. It would be humiliating if Andrew still possessed enough ego to be wounded. But sitting in that cheap room in Monaco, expensive clothes on an exhausted body, looking at a photograph of a daughter who no longer needed him, he discovered that pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. "I accept the meeting," he typed back. "I'll be in Los Angeles tomorrow." Practical arrangements remained. A flight back. A hotel while he looked for permanent accommodation. Since the Beverly Hills mansion now belonged to Klaus Hoffman. Clothes, documents, all the fragments of a life that needed to be reorganized when everything was falling apart. But first, Andrew allowed himself a few more minutes on that rough floor, looking at the photograph of Isabella eating ice cream under the Brazilian sun, memorizing that smile. Keeping that image as a reminder of what truly mattered, of what he had sacrificed at the altar of ambition and empty validation. Outside, Monaco was waking up to another day of indifferent luxury. Yachts glided through the harbor. Ferraris roared down narrow streets. The European elite proceeded with their elaborate lives, already forgetting the previous night's scandal, always in search of the next entertainment. And Andrew Costa, who had once belonged to that world, now existed in a strange limbo between who he had been and who he would need to become. The floor was hard. The carpet smelled of mold. But for the first time in years he wasn't running, he wasn't building, He wasn't conquering, he was just being. And in the forced quietude of that pause, something was beginning to change. The flight back to Los Angeles stretched for 11 hours of internal turbulence far worse than any atmospheric instability. Andrew had booked a seat in economy class, not out of immediate financial necessity, but for something that vaguely resembled self-imposed penance. Squeezed between a man snoring too loudly and a woman typing frantically on a laptop emitting a bluish light, he discovered that anonymity had its own kind of brutal comfort. No one recognized him. Without a shave, without his usual polish, wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt he had hastily bought at the airport, Andrew had become invisible in ways he had never experienced. Flight attendants didn't offer champagne or preferential treatment. Passengers didn't whisper, recognizing his name. He was just another middle-aged man traveling in economy class, carrying emotional baggage far heavier than the suitcases in the overhead compartment. Patricia Chen awaited him in the LAX airport lobby, a tablet under her arm and an expression that blended professionalism with something dangerously close to pity. She wore an impeccable gray pantsuit, black hair pulled back into a severe bun, elegant framed glasses framing eyes that had seen too many empires crumble to show genuine surprise. "You look terrible," were her words of welcome, as direct as ever. "Thanks for the brutal honesty, Patricia." She guided him through the airport crowd with military efficiency, maintaining a professional distance she had established from day one working for him. Patricia had never been dazzled by money or superficial charm. Perhaps that's why she lasted so long on his team while other assistants came and went like tides. The car waiting for them wasn't the usual private driver. Patricia herself was driving an unassuming Toyota sedan that definitely didn't match her salary. "I thought it best to keep a low profile," she explained as she navigated the dense traffic toward downtown Los Angeles. "Photographers are camped out in front of your old office. TMZ offered $5,000 for a current photo of you." "5,000?" Andrew almost laughed. "My stock has fallen significantly." Consider market perspective. You're no longer an interesting real estate magnate. You're just another rich man who ruined his marriage, a common commodity in Los Angeles. They drove in silence for a few minutes, passing through familiar urban landscape that suddenly felt strangely alien. Andrew had spent 15 years building a presence in that city, closing deals that transformed skylines, creating structures where only empty lots once stood. Now he watched everything through the passenger window like a tourist, disconnected from his own history. "Klaus Hoffman wants a meeting this afternoon." Patricia broke the silence. "His office in the financial district, 3 p.m. He's been surprisingly reasonable considering the circumstances. He's willing to keep you in a consultative position with a salary of $300,000 annually." 300,000. Andrew had spent more than that on watches in the last 2 years, but he nodded in understanding. "What about Richard, the board?" "Richard is furious but restrained. The board voted last night for full cooperation with Hoffman during the transition. Shares stabilized after an initial drop. Apparently, the market believes an efficient German can actually improve operations." The jab wasn't intentional, Andrew knew. Patricia was just stating facts, but it hurt to acknowledge that his company could thrive without him, that it might even improve under new leadership less distracted by side entertainments. Patricia parked in front of a modest commercial building in Koreatown. "I've booked a temporary apartment on the 5th floor, furnished, month to month, nothing extravagant but functional. Your belongings from the hotel suite in Monaco have been sent by courier, arriving tomorrow." She handed him a thick envelope. "Divorce papers arrived this morning via Geneva. I've given them a preliminary read. Renata isn't asking for alimony for herself. Only for Isabella, a surprisingly modest amount considering your previous assets. She wants full custody with quarterly supervised visitation for you, subject to prior psychological evaluation." Andrew took the envelope without opening it. The weight felt disproportionate to the contents. "Supervised. A standard clause in cases where there's concern about the parent's emotional stability. Considering your recent public collapse and drastic change in circumstances, any judge would approve. Patricia hesitated, then added in a slightly softer voice, "She's protecting Isabella, Andrew, not necessarily punishing you." He nodded mechanically. Of course, Renata was protecting her daughter. It's what mothers did, especially when fathers repeatedly proved unreliable. The apartment on the 5th floor smelled of fresh paint and department store furniture. A generic beige sofa faced a medium-sized television. A compact kitchen with basic appliances. A small bedroom with a double bed and a simple nightstand. A functional bathroom with an acrylic shower stall. Everything perfectly adequate and completely anonymous. "I have a meeting with other clients." Patricia checked her watch. "You have 3 hours before you meet Hoffman. I suggest a shower, appropriate attire, and strong coffee. I've laid out a suit on the bed. Nothing ostentatious, just professional." When she left, Andrew remained standing in the center of the empty room, absorbing the silence of a space that held absolutely no history. No photographs on the walls. No personal objects accumulated over the years. Just clean surfaces waiting for someone to impress meaning upon them. He should have been devastated. Years of accumulation, decades of meticulous construction, all evaporated in a 20-minute performative auction. But as he surveyed the empty apartment, Andrew discovered something unexpected. Relief. There was no longer the burden of keeping up appearances. No more expensive armor to polish daily. No more exhaustive performance of being Andrew Costa, real estate magnate, ruthless conqueror, the man who had it all. Because he never had it all. He had many things, he realized now, but he had confused quantity with substance. Accumulation with achievement. The shower in the basic stall was surprisingly satisfying. Hot water without a sophisticated jet, just consistent pressure washing away the salt from the transatlantic flight and layers of pretense he'd carried for so long. He shaved with a disposable razor Patricia had left on the sink, watching a familiar face emerge in the fogged mirror. Expression lines around his eyes he hadn't noticed before. Gray hairs at his temples more pronounced than he remembered. When had he last truly looked at himself? Not the hurried reflection while adjusting a tie before an important meeting, but a genuine observation of the person inhabiting that skin. The suit Patricia had chosen was a discreet Hugo Boss. Charcoal gray with a white shirt and a navy tie. Suitable for a business meeting without shouting wealth. Andrew dressed slowly, feeling the texture of the fabric, concentrating on each small action like a forced meditation. 15 minutes before the scheduled meeting, he was sitting in the lobby of the commercial building in the financial district where Klaus Hoffman had established operations. The lobby was all cold marble and polished steel, impersonal and intimidating in the way corporate architecture intended to be. Executives hurried through, engrossed in their phones, chasing deadlines and quotas, living lives Andrew intimately recognized because that was exactly how he had existed for decades. "Mr. Costa," a young assistant, German by her accent, approached with a tablet and a polite smile. "Mr. Hoffman is ready to see you." The office on the 12th floor offered a panoramic view of Los Angeles, stretching to the Pacific. Klaus Hoffman waited by the window, hands clasped behind his back, observing the city with a contemplative expression. He turned as Andrew entered, revealing a man in his early 50s. Graying blonde hair cut militarily short, sharp blue eyes evaluating everything with German precision. "Herr Costa," he extended his hand, the grip firm but not aggressive. "Thank you for coming." "There didn't seem to be much choice," Andrew replied honestly. Hoffman almost smiled. "I appreciate your candor. Please have a seat." They settled into leather armchairs across from the executive desk. The assistant served coffee in fine porcelain cups, then silently disappeared. "I must admit," Hoffman began, "your wife is a remarkable woman. The execution of that auction was a masterpiece of strategic planning. I consulted 6 different lawyers trying to find a legal loophole. There isn't one. She was always smarter than me, Andrew said simply. Intelligence helps, but what I saw was more than that. It was discipline, patience, the ability to maintain focus on a long-term goal despite constant provocations. Hoffman took a sip of coffee. Qualities, frankly, that you have shown to lack in recent years. There was no cruelty in the observation, just a factual assessment that Andrew couldn't dispute. Costa Development has a solid structure, Hoffman continued. Your initial projects show impressive vision, but the last 3 years reveal increasing neglect, hasty decisions, emotional rather than strategic investments. The company survived despite your leadership, not because of it. Every word was a scalpel exposing pathologies Andrew had avoided examining. But there was also a strange compassion in the brutality, like a surgeon removing necrotic tissue to save the patient. I am willing to offer you a consultative position, Hoffman declared, not out of charity, but because your institutional knowledge has value, however with non-negotiable conditions. Andrew waited. First, weekly therapy with a professional I will designate. Your mental health impacts any project you touch. Second, no direct involvement with clients or media for at least 1 year. Internal work only, away from the spotlight. Third, quarterly performance evaluations. Failing any metric results in immediate termination. These were humiliating terms for someone who had commanded an empire, but they were also fair, Andrew recognized. They were a structure for a man who had completely gone off the rails, forced guardrails to prevent further destruction. I accept, he said without hesitation. Hoffman studied him for a long moment. Do you understand that this is not a fresh start? It's the end of one phase and perhaps, if you work genuinely, the beginning of something different. But Andrew Costa, as you defined him, is over. I know. And saying it aloud, Andrew realized he finally believed it. The man he had been, that elaborate construct of achievements and masks, had truly died on that stage in Monaco. What remained now was raw material, damaged and imperfect, but perhaps capable of being reshaped into something less grandiose but more authentic. They quickly concluded the practical details. Salary, basic benefits, a start date in 2 weeks, enough time for Andrew to establish a minimally functional routine. When the meeting ended, it was just past 4 p.m. The golden afternoon light bathing the surrounding skyscrapers. Andrew left the building and began to walk without any particular destination. He crossed blocks of the urban center, observing street vendors, homeless people on corners, workers rushing to subway stations. Humanity in all its disordered complexity, existing completely oblivious to his particular dramas. Eventually, he found himself in front of a small Catholic church, squeezed between commercial buildings. He wasn't a religious man, never had been. But something in the promised silence of that space drew him in. He pushed open heavy wooden doors and entered the cool dimness of the interior. The chapel was empty, except for an elderly woman praying silently in the front pew. Votive candles flickered on a side altar, each flame representing an anonymous plea raised to the divine. Andrew slid into a back pew, absorbing a stillness that felt physical in its density. He didn't know how to pray. He had no words to offer to an entity he barely believed existed. But sitting in that silence, charged with centuries of others' devotion, Andrew finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of all he had lost and all that was still left to lose. And for the second time since Monaco, he cried. Not dramatic tears, but silent sobs of a man finally confronting the devastation he had caused. Not just to himself, but to everyone who should have been protected by him. When he emerged from the church 20 minutes later, twilight was painting Los Angeles orange and purple. The city remained indifferent, magnificent in its apathetic grandeur. And Andrew Costa, stripped of empire and illusions, began the long walk back to the empty apartment, carrying only the weight of who he would need to become. The cool September light streamed through the windows of the therapist's office on the 3rd floor of an unassuming building in Santa Monica. Andrew settled into the worn leather armchair, watching the therapist assigned by Klaus Hoffman leaf through her notes with a neutral expression. Dr. Helen Vasquez, in her early 50s. Graying hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, reading glasses hanging from a silver chain. Her room smelled of lavender and had that quiet quality of spaces designed for confidences. "This is our 8th session," she said without raising her eyes from the pages. "Enough time to establish patterns. You arrive punctually, answer questions with superficial honesty, but you haven't yet touched on the deeper layers." Andrew shifted in his seat, his fingers drumming nervously on the armchair's armrest. 2 weeks had passed since his return from Monaco. 2 weeks of monotonous routine, waking up in the empty apartment, solitary coffee, walks to the Costa Development office, where he now occupied a modest room on the 3rd floor, far from the executive suites. His work consisted of reviewing old contracts, compiling historical project data, important but completely anonymous tasks. No one asked for his opinion in meetings. No one sought his approval. He was, effectively, a junior employee in the company he had founded. "I don't know what you want me to say," he finally replied. "I want you to stop performing." Dr. Vasquez closed her notebook and took off her glasses, focusing on him with penetrating brown eyes. "You're still playing the role of a contrite man, saying the right words, demonstrating appropriate remorse. But this is still a construct, Andrew. You've just traded the magnate's mask for the mask of a man in redemption." The words struck something deep that he had been avoiding examining. What if there's nothing left but masks? What if when I remove all the layers, I discover there's no real core? Then we'll find that core together. But first, you need to stop running. She leaned slightly forward. "Talk about Isabella, not about missing her, not about abstract regret. Tell me a specific memory." Andrew closed his eyes, letting fragments of memory emerge. She was 5. Renata had traveled to New York for the weekend, something related to an art auction she was curating. It was my responsibility to take care of Isabella alone for the first time in months. Saturday morning, I woke up to her tugging on my sleeve, saying she wanted to make pancakes. The scene rebuilt itself with surprising clarity. The kitchen of the Beverly Hills mansion flooded with morning light. Isabella wearing pink unicorn pajamas, her hair disheveled from sleep, dragging a stool to reach the marble counter. "I didn't know how to make pancakes," Andrew continued, opening his eyes. "I'd never made breakfast in my life. There were always staff, restaurants, room service. But she was so excited. So I looked up a recipe on my phone while she separated the ingredients. How was it? Disastrous. I burned the first batch. The second stuck to the pan. Flour spread across the floor when Isabella tried to measure by herself. The kitchen turned into a culinary war zone. He smiled involuntarily at the memory. But Isabella laughed so much. She said we were terrible chefs but a great team. Eventually we produced something edible, covered it with an absurd amount of chocolate syrup, sat on the kitchen floor because the dining table seemed too formal, and ate burnt pancakes as if they were a delicacy. What did you feel in that moment? Andrew considered carefully. Complete. Not because of a closed deal or professional achievement. Just sitting on the floor with my daughter covered in flour, laughing at our pathetic attempts to cook. It was enough. She was enough. When was the last time you allowed yourself to feel that sufficiency? The question pierced a defense Andrew hadn't even realized he was maintaining. I don't know. At some point after that breakfast, I went back to the office on Monday and dove back into the cycle. Meetings, negotiations, the next acquisition. Isabella became something I visited between more important commitments. Except there was never anything more important. I know that now. The words came out harsh, laden with a weight that had been accumulating. But for years I convinced myself I was building an empire for her, ensuring her future, creating a legacy. All these grandiose justifications for essentially ignoring my own daughter. Dr. Vasquez remained silent, allowing him to continue. And Renata tried to tell me. Not dramatically, not in explosive confrontations, small observations. Isabella asked about you today. The recital was beautiful. You should have seen it. She drew this for you. I left it on your desk. I heard but didn't listen. I nodded acknowledgement while replying to emails. Promised to do better next week. Bought an expensive gift to compensate for my absence. Why was it easier to be absent? Andrew forced himself to truly consider the question. Because being present required vulnerability. It required being just a father, not Andrew Costa, the magnate. And at some point, I forgot how to just be a simple human, or never learned. The observation hung in the air like a challenge. Andrew leaned back in the armchair, studying cracks in the ceiling that probably no one else noticed. My father built a small construction business in rural Brazil. He worked until his hands were permanently calloused, every real earned with literal sweat. He died at 58, a heart attack on the construction site, leaving my mother with debts that took years to clear. And you decided you would never be vulnerable that way. I decided it would be different, that I would build something so big, so solid, that it could never collapse, that no one I loved would ever have to worry about money or security. Andrew laughed without humor. The irony is that in the process of ensuring financial security, I destroyed the emotional security that truly mattered. Dr. Vasquez wrote something briefly. Renata sent communication through the lawyers. The first visit with Isabella can be scheduled next month if you complete the psychological evaluation. Andrew's heart quickened uncomfortably. She's ready to see me. The question is whether you are ready. Not to perform the role of a contrite father, but to genuinely show up as you are now, imperfect and working on rebuilding. I don't know if I am. Honesty is a start. She checked the clock on the wall. Our time is up for today, but I want you to reflect on something until next week. If you had just 1 hour with Isabella, with no expectations of impressing her, no need to fix everything, just 1 hour being a present father, what would you do together? Andrew carried the question with him as he left the office, walking through the tree-lined streets of Santa Monica, where couples strolled with dogs and families entered cozy coffee shops. The pleasant September temperature filled the public spaces with ordinary life, people living normal existences that he now observed like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. The apartment in Koreatown awaited him with its familiar impersonality. In the days since he had settled there, Andrew had made few changes. A few clothes hung in the closet, toiletries lined up in the bathroom, but the walls remained bare, surfaces clear of personal objects. It was less a home than a temporary station, a physical limbo corresponding to the emotional one he inhabited. He prepared a simple dinner, a newly acquired skill from these past weeks. Pasta with tomato sauce, a basic salad. He ate in silence before the window that offered a view of adjacent buildings and a small sliver of sky that gradually darkened. People turned on lights in surrounding apartments, small illuminated aquariums revealing fragments of other lives. A woman watering plants. A couple discussing something animatedly. A man alone, like him, engrossed in a glowing laptop. Loneliness had a specific texture, Andrew realized. It wasn't just the absence of company, but a constant confrontation with himself, with no distractions to cushion the weight of circular thoughts. There were moments, especially on nights like that, when he felt an almost physical urgency to call someone. Not Camilla or any of the other lovers. Those were already hazy memories of a different person. But Renata. He missed talking to Renata in ways he hadn't experienced in years, perhaps never fully appreciated when he still had unrestricted access to her presence. He missed the way she challenged his opinions on art and architecture. Her genuine laugh that emerged when something truly amused her, unlike the polite social laugh she used at public events. The way she read before bed, always Portuguese novels that connected him to the Brazilian roots he had progressively neglected. How they could be perfectly comfortable in shared silence, with no need to fill every moment with words. She had built an entire life separate from him, he realized now. She maintained friendships he had never bothered to get to know properly. She participated in reading groups and art history courses. She volunteered at cultural institutions. She raised Isabella with solid values and a sense of identity. All while he arrogantly believed he was the gravitational center around which she orbited. Renata had never orbited anyone. She had always been her own complete planet, and he had simply failed to notice. His phone vibrated, interrupting his spiral of thoughts. A message from Patricia. Hoffman wants you at the meeting tomorrow about the residential project in Pasadena. 9 o'clock, main conference room. Dress appropriately. It was the first time in 2 weeks his presence had been requested at a real meeting. Andrew should have felt validated, proof that he still had worth. But all he felt was a cold anxiety, an acute awareness of how much he no longer knew about the operations of the company he had founded. He replied, confirming his attendance, then forced himself to get ready for sleep. A simple ritual he was developing. Shower, teeth, comfortable sleepwear bought at a department store. He lay down on the bed that never seemed completely comfortable, observing patterns of light projected onto the ceiling by car headlights passing on the street. Dr. Vasquez's question returned. 1 hour with Isabella. What would they do? His immediate inclination was to think big, an exaggerated compensation. Disneyland, an amusement park, some spectacular event that would demonstrate how much he loved her. But that would just be another performance, an attempt to impress instead of connect. The real answer, when he finally allowed it to emerge, was simple to the point of pain. He would make pancakes with her again. They would mess up the kitchen together. They would sit on the floor, eating a culinary disaster covered with too much syrup. They would talk about drawings she had made, stories she had invented, small but significant thoughts that filled an 8-year-old's mind. It would be enough. She would be enough. And maybe, just maybe, he could start to learn how to be enough for her too. Outside, Los Angeles continued its perpetual existence, indifferent to individual human dramas. But in that small apartment in Koreatown, Andrew Costa closed his eyes, carrying the weight of simple realizations. He had survived another day. He had faced uncomfortable truths. He had allowed himself to feel loss without escaping into distractions. And when sleep finally arrived, it brought dreams not of empires or conquests, but of a brown-eyed girl laughing as she mixed flour in a bowl that was too big, declaring that they were terrible chefs but a great team. Morning arrived with that particular October light that seemed to gild every surface it touched. Andrew woke before his alarm, as had been happening for the past few weeks, his body adjusting to simple routines he had never needed to follow before. He prepared coffee using a basic pour-over method, savoring the ritual of measuring beans and waiting for the water to slowly pass through the ground powder. Small pleasures, he discovered, held their own weight when he paid genuine attention. There was a message from Patricia on his phone, sent at 6 in the morning, typical of her. Psychological evaluation approved, visit authorized for next Saturday, 2 p.m., Griffith Park, 2 hours duration, supervisor present, but discreet. Renata will only be there to drop off Isabella. Andrew's hands trembled slightly as he reread the words. 3 months since Monaco. 3 months of weekly therapy, humble work at the office, a monotonous but stabilizing routine that was slowly rebuilding a foundation he had never known was missing. And now, finally, he would see his daughter. Work that day was hazy, his consciousness divided between the budget spreadsheets he was reviewing and the nervous anticipation of the approaching Saturday. Klaus Hoffmann briefly appeared in his office, a rare gesture that signaled something significant. "I heard about the approved visit," he said without preamble, pragmatic German as always. "Remember what we discussed. Don't try to compensate for absences with grandiose promises. Just show up and be present." Andrew nodded, recognizing the wisdom in the simplicity of the advice. Hoffman studied him for a moment, then added something unexpected. "My daughter was 7 when my marriage ended. Also due to my failures, although different from yours. It took 2 years before we could establish a real connection again. Patience was more important than any dramatic gesture. When the German left, Andrew remained seated, processing the shared vulnerability. Klaus Hoffmann, efficient and controlled, also carried scars from destroyed relationships. Everyone carried something, Andrew realized. The difference was in how they chose to rebuild afterward. Saturday dawned with a clear sky, a pleasant temperature that made Los Angeles look like a postcard city. Andrew dressed carefully but without ostentation. Comfortable jeans, a casual shirt, walking shoes. He took a small backpack containing water, some simple snacks, and pancake-making equipment he had brought from the apartment, a crazy idea that Dr. Vasquez had encouraged when he mentioned it in the last session. "Recreate something that was genuinely good between you two," she had said. "A shared memory of a real moment, not a new performance." Griffith Park stretched green and expansive under the golden afternoon light. Families occupied picnic tables, children ran chasing soccer balls, couples walked shaded trails. Andrew arrived 20 minutes early, his stomach churning with a nervousness he hadn't felt since presenting to his first major investor decades ago. He recognized Renata immediately, even from a distance. She was near the playground area, Isabella beside her holding a pink backpack adorned with characters Andrew didn't recognize. His daughter had grown in the months since he had last seen her. She looked taller, her hair a little longer, but still those familiar brown curls that reflected the sun. When Renata noticed his approach, she said something low to Isabella, then began to walk away. But before leaving completely, she turned one last time. Her eyes met Andrew's across the distance, and in that brief moment, he saw something that wasn't anger or resentment. It was something more complex, a mix of caution and hesitant hope, a recognition that what would happen in the next few hours mattered immensely to the child they both loved. Then she was gone, walking toward the parking lot, leaving them alone except for the discreet presence of an older woman sitting on a nearby bench with an open book, the designated supervisor Patricia had mentioned. Andrew approached slowly, crouching when he got close to be at Isabella's eye level. She observed him with a careful expression, not exactly fearful but reserved, a child processing a complicated situation with a heartbreaking maturity. "Hi, Bella," he said softly, using the nickname that had always been theirs alone. "Hi, Daddy." Her voice was small but firm. She twisted her backpack strap nervously. Silence stretched between them, filled by distant park sounds around them. Andrew forced himself not to fill the void with empty words, breathing through the discomfort as Dr. Vasquez had taught him. "I brought something," he said finally, taking the backpack off his shoulders. "Remember when we made pancakes that morning? You were 5, and we turned the kitchen into a disaster zone?" Isabella's expression softened minimally, the memory touching something that remained intact despite everything. "You burned them all." "I sure did. I was a terrible chef." Andrew smiled genuinely. "I thought maybe we could try again. There's a picnic area over there with grills. I brought ingredients. I'll probably mess everything up again, but we're a great team," Isabella completed softly, an echo of the phrase she had said years before. Something untied in Andrew's chest, a knot he had been carrying for months, loosening only slightly. "Exactly." They walked together to the picnic area. The distance between their bodies physical but also emotional. Miles yet to be crossed. Andrew set up his improvised equipment while Isabella watched, still cautious but curiosity starting to overcome her reserve. "Mommy said you live in a different apartment now," she commented as he measured flour. "That's true, much smaller than the old house, but it has a window with a nice view. Do you like it there?" The question was simple but loaded. Andrew considered carefully. "I'm learning to like it. It's different, but sometimes different is necessary." Isabella processed that silently. Then, hesitantly, she asked what she really wanted to know. "Are you going to leave again?" The dagger of the question pierced any remaining defenses. Andrew stopped stirring the batter, turning completely to face her. "Bella, look at me." When she raised her eyes, he continued with an honesty that hurt, but liberated. "I messed everything up. I left when I should have stayed. I prioritized the wrong things. I hurt you and your mother in ways I am deeply, deeply sorry for." Tears started to well in her eyes, and Andrew felt his own tears threatening. "I can't promise I'll be perfect now," he continued, "but I promise I'm working every day to be better. And I won't disappear again. Even if we can't always be together, even if things are different, you will always matter more than anything else. Always." Isabella wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Do you really promise?" "I really promise." She studied his face for a long moment, a 9-year-old child assessing an adult's sincerity with wisdom beyond her years. Then, slowly, she took a step toward him. Another step. Until she was close enough for Andrew to carefully envelop her in a hug that she returned with surprising strength, small arms clutching him as she sobbed against his chest. They remained like that, father and daughter rebuilding a bridge he had broken, while the park continued around them, indifferent to the small but monumental miracle happening. Eventually, Isabella pulled back, wiping her face and offering a trembling smile. "Can we make the pancakes now?" "Absolutely." The next hour unfolded with imperfect simplicity. They burned the first batch of pancakes. Isabella laughed when flour accidentally scattered. Andrew taught her to flip batter on the griddle, holding her small hand over the spatula, guiding the movement together. They talked about school, about new friends she had made, about a book she was reading. They didn't discuss heavy topics. They didn't process complex traumas. They simply existed together in that space, making mediocre food and rebuilding connection one small interaction at a time. When they finally sat down to eat pancakes generously covered with syrup, Isabella asked casually, "Can we do this again? In a few weeks?" "I would really like that," Andrew replied, his heart expanding with a hope he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months. The 2 hours passed too quickly. When Renata returned to pick up Isabella, the girl ran to show her the photos they had taken, animated in a way that made Renata's expression imperceptibly soften. "Was it good?" She asked softly, as Isabella packed her backpack. "It was real," Andrew replied simply. "Thank you for allowing this." Renata nodded, not offering words, but also not denying recognition. She still carried justified grievances, he knew. Healing would take years, if it happened completely. But there was possibility now, space to rebuild something different from what they had, but perhaps more honest. As he watched them leave, Isabella waving animatedly from the car window, Andrew felt a weight of gratitude so profound he could barely process it. He hadn't deserved that afternoon. He hadn't earned it by right or conquest. It was a gift given by a woman he had hurt, but who chose to put her daughter's well-being above justified vengeance. The sun was beginning to set as he left the park, coloring the sky with oranges and purples. Los Angeles stretched out around him, vast and indifferent as ever. But Andrew walked differently. Not with the arrogance of a man who had conquered a city, but with the humility of someone finally learning to live in it, part of its complex human fabric instead of a figure above it. His phone vibrated. A message from Dr. Vasquez, brief but significant. How did it go? He typed a reply as he walked, words forming with a clarity he hadn't possessed before. It was a start, just a start, but real. And it was enough. For the first time in a long time, Andrew Costa allowed himself to believe that rebuilding was possible, that redemption didn't come from grand gestures, but from consistently showing up, from choosing presence over performance, from loving imperfectly, but genuinely. The city shimmered around him as night approached. Millions of lives intertwined in a complexity he was only just beginning to comprehend. And somewhere in that vastness, a 9-year-old girl carried the memory of an afternoon making pancakes with an imperfect father who was finally learning what truly mattered.